Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Oh, I'm always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So today, we're going to tackle something pretty big. The creation account from Genesis, chapters 1 and 2.
Yeah, Genesis. It's like where it all begins, right?
Literally. We've got some great resources to help us unpack it all. Video summaries from the Bible Project, commentaries, the Enduring Word one is particularly good, and of course, different translations of the Bible itself.
So we're talking King James Version, ESV, the whole shebang.
Yeah, we're going to look at all the angles, get those different perspectives, and really dig deep into what this text is all about.
You know what always gets me about Genesis is how it tackles those like really massive questions. How did it all begin? You know?
Yeah. And what does it even mean to be human? I mean, these are questions people have been asking for centuries.
Totally. Everyone loves a good origin story.
And speaking of origins, one thing that really surprised me was in that Bible Project video. They talked about how that very first verse, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, isn't quite what we usually think.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. You know, it's easy to picture this vast, like, cosmic creation event.
Right, like stars and galaxies exploding into existence.
But when you look at the original Hebrew, it actually paints a more, like a more specific picture.
Ah.
It's less about creating the whole universe and more about creating a specific space ready for life.
So it's more like the sky above and the land below.
Exactly. It's like the story is zooming in, setting the stage for everything else to come.
I like that, setting the stage. And you know what else is interesting?
What's that?
If you look closely, you'll notice the word God is like everywhere in that first chapter.
Oh, for sure.
It's repeated over and over. Like the author's really emphasizing that God is the one in control, like the driving force behind everything.
Yeah, and it's not just like any name for God. The Enduring Word commentary pointed out they use Elohim, which is plural, right?
Right. It's like God, but more than one. Makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's like a little hint, maybe, of the Trinity.
The Trinity.
Yeah, the idea that God is one being, but exists in three persons: Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Okay, whoa. Deep stuff.
It's a complex concept, but we'll see hints of it pop up throughout Genesis.
I'm definitely intrigued. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there was something else in the Bible Project video that I hadn't really thought about before.
Oh, let's hear it.
It's about the word created itself.
Ah, yes, that's a juicy one. The Hebrew word, bara, has this idea of creating something totally new, like from nothing.
Out of thin air.
Kinda. It's like imagine a magician pulling a rabbit out of an empty hat. No pre-existing materials, just God bringing something into existence, just like that.
Okay, that's pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, that highlights just how powerful God is, right?
Absolutely. It's a key part of the whole biblical worldview.
Yeah. So before all this creating happened, what was there? I mean, Genesis describes the world as without form and void, with darkness everywhere and this deep abyss, and then there's the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. It's such a vivid image,
Yeah, it's powerful, and it's definitely full of symbolism. The deep, for example, represents this primordial chaos.
Oh,
and then you have the Spirit hovering over it, which kind of gives you this sense of potential, like order's about to emerge.
like the calm before the storm, but in reverse.
Exactly. And the Enduring Word commentary makes a really interesting connection here. They draw a parallel between this and how the Holy Spirit works in our lives.
Oh, how so?
Well, they talk about how the Spirit can transform us, take us from a state of spiritual darkness, confusion, and bring order to the chaos within us.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to think about it. It shows how Genesis can be read on different levels, right?
For sure. It's both a cosmic creation story, but also a reflection of our own spiritual journeys.
Okay, so let's get into the creation week itself. That structure in the Bible Project video was great, breaking down the 6 days, each one starting with God said and ending with evening and morning.
Yeah, it's super structured. And some people see that repetition, the mention of evening and morning, as pointing toward literal 24-hour days.
Oh, interesting. I can see why they'd interpret it that way. Now, one detail that really blew my mind was in the Enduring Word commentary.
What was that?
They point out that light was created on day 1, but the sun and the moon don't show up until day 4.
That's kind of wild,
It's
right?
like, what kind of light is this? It's almost suggesting that light has a deeper meaning,
Mhm.
a supernatural aspect that goes beyond just the physical light from the sun.
Right, like God is the ultimate source of light, even before the sun exists. And,
Exact.
that connects with stuff in the New Testament, too. Jesus is described as the light of the world. So even though these texts were written centuries apart, they're speaking to similar themes.
It's cool how different parts of the Bible can connect like that. Now, as God starts creating plants and animals, there's this phrase that pops up again and again, according to its kind. What's the significance of that?
Well, I think this is where Genesis offers a specific perspective on like the diversity of life. It suggests there's a fixed order to creation, like God creates distinct kinds of creatures.
So you could have different types of dogs, like poodles and golden retrievers, but they're all still dogs. They're not going to, turn into cats or something.
Precisely. They can vary within their kind, but they can't transform into a completely different kind. The Bible Project video uses the example of Darwin's finches. Even though they adapted to different environments, they always remain finches.
That's interesting.
This idea definitely challenges that whole concept of, one species evolving into another over time.
That's one of the points that causes a lot of debate, for sure. I remember reading a quote in one of our sources from Philip Johnson. He's a scientist he's pretty critical of Darwinism.
Oh, yeah, what did he say?
He said, if evolution means the gradual change of one kind of organism into another kind, the outstanding characteristic of the fossil record is the absence of evidence for evolution.
It's definitely a bold statement.
Yeah, makes you think, right? It raises some interesting questions about how we interpret the fossil record and like the origins of different species.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes studying Genesis so fascinating. It's this ancient text, but it's still relevant to discussions happening today.
Totally. It pushes us to think critically about our assumptions and consider different perspectives on the world around us.
For sure. Now, on day 6, we get to the creation of humanity. And there's that super powerful phrase, let us make man in our image after our likeness.
And boom, there's that plural pronoun again.
Right. It's like another little hint at that idea of the Trinity.
Okay, so we got the Trinity thing going on, but what does it even mean to be made in God's image?
That is a huge question. I think we need to take some time to unpack that one. It's going to be fascinating.
All right, so we're back and ready to tackle this whole image of God thing. I mean, what does that even mean? It sounds pretty profound.
Oh, it is profound. This phrase, it's echoed through history. It's inspired art, philosophy, even how we think about human rights.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it suggests there's something special about us, something that sets us apart from the rest of creation.
Right, like we're not just another animal.
Exactly. And both the Enduring Word commentary and that Bible Project video highlighted some key aspects of what it means to bear God's image. Things like, personality, morality, spirituality. These are all reflections of God's character in us.
It's like we have a little spark of divinity within us. I really like how the Enduring Word commentary put it.
I know, right? It means we can think, we can feel, we can choose, we can connect with God in a way that no other creature can.
It's almost like we're, miniature versions of God. I mean, not literally, but.
I see what you mean. We have this capacity for love, for creativity, for dominion even, over the world around us.
Speaking of dominion, that's another part of the creation story that gets, debated a lot. What does it actually mean for humans to have dominion over the earth?
It's a complex idea, for sure. There are definitely different interpretations out there.
Some people think it means we could just exploit the earth's resources,
Mm-hmm.
Like it's all ours for the taking.
I've heard that too. But the Enduring Word commentary suggests a different take.
Okay, I'm listening.
They point out that dominion also involves this idea of, being fruitful and multiplying and subduing the earth. So it's more about cultivating and caring for creation, not just conquering it.
So more like being a gardener than a dictator.
Yeah, exactly. And that idea of stewardship connects with another important concept here. Responsibility.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Being made in God's image means we're accountable to him for how we treat the world, and how we treat each other.
Okay, I can see that. Now, this whole topic of creation and evolution, things can get a little controversial, especially when we start talking about the fossil record.
Yeah, that's definitely a hot topic. There are so many different perspectives on how to interpret the scientific evidence.
Is the fossil record proof of evolution? Or does it point to something else?
Well, the Enduring Word commentary actually brought up the work of this guy, Solly Zuckerman. He was a British scientist who, get this, even though he was an evolutionist himself,
No way.
he was pretty skeptical about a lot of those human ancestor claims that were based on fossils.
So he's saying some of those claims were, like, exaggerated.
Yeah, basically. He thought the field of human origins was often driven more by speculation than, like hard science.
So how do we make sense of all this? I mean, on one hand, you've got this scientific view of human evolution, and then on the other hand, you've got this biblical account of creation.
Right, and they seem so different.
It's tough to reconcile sometimes.
Well, one thing Philip Johnson suggests, the scientist we quoted earlier, he suggests there's this, like, priesthood within the scientific establishment.
The priesthood.
It's kind of a metaphor. It's like a group that fiercely protects the prevailing narrative, even if it means overlooking or, like, downplaying evidence that doesn't fit.
So he's basically saying there could be some bias going on. Maybe even an agenda.
He's encouraging us to think critically, to not just blindly accept everything we're told, even from authority figures or institutions. Look at the evidence for ourselves. Be open to other interpretations.
I see. Don't just take their word for it.
Exactly.
And you know what? That reminds me of the Scopes monkey trial.
Oh, yeah, back in the 1920s.
A teacher was put on trial for teaching evolution in school.
Such a landmark case. Really highlights how deeply entrenched this whole debate between creation and evolution is in our culture.
It's amazing to think that a trial from almost 100 years ago can still be, like, shaping how we view science and faith today.
It really shows the power of ideas, and how they're presented. The Enduring Word commentary pointed out that even though, like, the Scopes trial didn't really have a clear winner.
Right. It wasn't like a knockout.
It was still a huge PR victory for, the idea of evolution really helped to solidify its place in the public consciousness.
Interesting. Okay, so circling back to Genesis for a second. At the end of the creation account, God looks at everything he's made and says, "It is very good." I don't know. I always find that statement so powerful, especially considering the state of the world today.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast, isn't it? It reminds us that the world wasn't always filled with suffering and death and decay. It points back to this original state of harmony.
Like it was perfect.
Yeah, a state of perfection.
It makes you wonder, what happened? How did things go from very good to, well, all this?
That's a question we'll definitely be exploring as we continue our journey through Genesis. But for now, I think it's important to hold on to that image. God's original design, a world where everything was in balance, where everything was working as it should.
It does give you hope, It reminds me that even though things are, things are messed up now, there's still that potential for beauty, for healing, for things to be made right again.
Absolutely. That's a theme that runs throughout the entire Bible, this idea of redemption, of restoring what was broken.
Okay, so let's recap for a sec. We've covered a lot of ground here. What it means to be made in God's image, the implications of having dominion over the earth, different perspectives on the fossil record, and that powerful statement about creation being very good. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, we have. The beauty of Genesis is that there's always more to uncover, more to ponder, more to think about.
Okay, before we wrap up, though, there was one more thing I found really interesting in the Enduring Word commentary. It was this idea that God might have created the earth, with a built-in time sequence.
Oh, yeah. You mean like an old Earth?
Exactly. Yeah. Like the commentary suggests that God could have created things with an appearance of age. Like take Adam, he was created as a fully grown man, not a baby, right?
Yeah.
And those trees in the Garden of Eden, they probably had rings, even though they hadn't been around for years and years.
It's a mind-blowing concept for sure, but it could potentially reconcile that scientific evidence about the age of the universe and the fossil record with, the biblical account of creation.
It's like our limited understanding of time, it doesn't necessarily apply to God. He can do things that are way beyond our comprehension.
It's humbling, isn't it? It makes you realize how much we don't know, how much we have to learn.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with? What makes Genesis so important, even after all these thousands of years?
For me, it all boils down to this. Genesis provides us with a framework for understanding our place in the world. It tells us who we are, where we come from, and what our purpose is.
Like a roadmap for life.
Yeah, but it's also a story that's still unfolding, even today.
And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the book of Genesis.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been. Until next time, Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking truth. Okay, so here we are, the final part of our Genesis deep dive. It's amazing how much we've uncovered, just from these first two chapters.
Yeah.
Really makes you realize how much depth and complexity there is in this ancient text.
It's incredible. You think about it, these stories are thousands of years old, and they're still so relevant today. They deal with, the most fundamental questions about life, about humanity, about our relationship with God.
Absolutely. And speaking of relationships, one of the things that really struck me was this idea of humanity being created for relationship, not just with God, but with each other too.
Yeah, it's like that line in the Bible Project video, it's not good for man to be alone.
Right. And that sets the stage for the creation of Eve and this whole idea that, humans are meant to live in community, to love and support one another.
Such a powerful message, especially in today's world, where people can feel so isolated, so disconnected. It's a reminder that we're wired for connection. We need each other.
We do.
Yeah.
I've always found that imagery of the Garden of Eden so captivating. It's like this perfect paradise where everything is in harmony. Humans living at peace with nature, with God.
It's a powerful symbol. It speaks to that deep longing we all have, for a world without pain, without suffering, without conflict. A world where we're fully connected to God and to each other.
But then, of course, there's the fall, that pivotal moment when humanity disobeys God and, well, everything changes.
Yeah, the fall introduces this idea of sin, that separation from God, from the goodness of creation. The Enduring Word commentary talked about how sin fractured that perfect harmony and brought all this suffering and brokenness into the world.
It's kind of like a mirror, isn't it? Reflecting our own reality. I mean, we all know what it's like to mess up, to make bad choices, to hurt others, to experience the consequences of our actions.
For sure. And Genesis doesn't shy away from that darkness. It acknowledges that reality of our brokenness. But it also offers a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Even in the midst of, the judgment for Adam and Eve's disobedience, God gives them a promise. There's that mysterious prophecy about a seed who will one day crush the serpent's head.
Right. It's like this foreshadowing, this hint of God's plan for redemption. He's not giving up on humanity. He's already working to restore what was broken.
So even though Genesis starts with this picture of perfection, it ends with this, sense of longing and anticipation of something more to come.
And that's what makes it such a powerful and enduring story. It speaks to our deepest hopes, our deepest fears, our desire for meaning, for purpose, in a world that often feels chaotic and broken.
It does. Well, we've journeyed through these first two chapters of Genesis, explored different interpretations, wrestled with some big questions, and honestly, it's been a pretty mind-blowing experience. So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away from all of this? What makes Genesis so important, even after all these thousands of years?
I think the most important thing is this. Genesis isn't just an ancient story, it's a living text. It still speaks to us today. It challenges us to think about our place in the world, our relationship with God, our responsibility to each other, and to creation.
It's a reminder that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, something that began with a loving creator and is still unfolding, even now.
And even though we might mess things up sometimes, there's always hope. Hope for redemption, for healing, for a return to that original goodness.
I love that. So if you're listening and you're feeling a little lost, maybe searching for meaning or just curious about where it all began, I encourage you to go back and read Genesis for yourself. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Yeah, you might find some new insights. And you might be surprised by how this ancient text can speak to your life in fresh and meaningful ways.
Couldn't said it better myself. So that wraps up our deep dive into the book of Genesis. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and keep seeking truth.